an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Immortal Great Souls Book 1, Bastion, chapters 27 through 30. In these chapters, Scorio manages to get into the school, and his locker, I predicted it would be empty. It's actually almost empty. It contains a clue. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Dan for commissioning this episode. I'm sorry, guys. I'm laughing because Dan's in the chat, and I had just finished saying that I am feeling very hype because I took a new pre-workout before my run, and it's like still kicking in and making me very excitable. And Dan in the chat says, we won't tell anyone it was just cocaine. I'll tell you what, kiddos. It is a good thing I never tried cocaine. I have a feeling I would have just loved that shit. I probably would, you know. I am somebody who needs pre-workout because it is difficult to get myself going. And I need that extra shove of caffeine and whatever else they've got mixed in there. They do a lot of nootropic stuff now. And I can understand why there was a subset of people who was just like, I'm not going to do anything unless I do my coke first. I kind of get it. Anyway, let's start talking about this book because we start off with Scorio and his big container of Dawn apple juice. And guys, last episode, I posited my theory about the fact that what if there are basically like metal detectors, but for magic? What if there is a way that they scan everybody going in and out of this academy and they can tell those who have ignited hearts or, you know, from those who don't? And it's sort of I realized after recording that episode, from the conversation that Scorio had earlier on with Naomi, she says that basically anybody has the potential to ignite their heart eventually. There's people who have different levels of talent with it, and it's, you know, it's going to be much, much more challenging for some folks, but technically everybody has the ability. So when I thought of that, I was like, well, maybe that kind of detector device wouldn't really make sense. Maybe it's just if they're ignited, yada, yada, yada. And it looks like that is not actually how it works. However, there is, when he gets to the door here and he is about to go through, the way that this guy reacts to him is sort of, to me, telling. Because he's coming in the door, he's trying to be casual, trying to be like, yeah, just doing my job. Not that interesting. I'm not interesting. This juice isn't interesting. And the guard who sees him says, cutting it fine, my lad, cutting it fine. Apologies was all he said. A flicker of surprise passed over his face and then he handed it back. Personal delivery? You know where to go? And there was something about the cutting it fine and then the surprise that for me felt like he was saying, you're cutting it fine coming back before curfew or something, as if he expected that Scorio was a student and then was surprised to see that he had a chit and that it was a delivery actually. I may be reading too much into that. It may be exactly what it looks like, that he's just like, oh, you're cutting it fine with your delivery. But there was something about the way he reacted to Scorio and then sort of adjusted that felt for me as if he got a sense of something off of Scorio that wasn't matching up to the tale Scorio is telling him with this chit. So I may be completely making that up, but it just later on, Scorio runs into somebody who can feel that he has power. And so it made me kind of worry in general about how easy this is for people of higher power levels to do, how much Scorio is going to have to start worrying about this potential side effect to his advancement. This could be more and more difficult to hide the better he gets, and he won't be able to fly under the radar the way he has been. So anyway, this guy tells him, go on in, don't wander around, don't gape at shit. You're going to get whipped if we catch you anywhere but where you're supposed to go. And Scorio goes in, and the way that he reacts to all of this, because this is just, it's so interesting to me. It's not just like he comes in and the place is straight up luxury. It's described as signs of elegance and decay, of past glories and faded promise. And the two of those coexisting is just really lending some credence to my theory that, something about this war isn't what it looks like, that something was said, something was done to affect memory or records or something, and that everybody's being put up to a job now that isn't what they're being told it is. I don't know. There's just the conflict here in appearance, I have to assume is symbolic of a further conflict that's higher up the chain. You know what I'm saying? So he gets to this courtyard, a massive fountain whose centerpiece was a much eroded statue of a humanoid cat holding aloft a great gourd. From this, 4 streams poured into separate pools, at whose lips were lined dozens of servants intent on refilling their buckets and pails. A humanoid cat, you say? I'm just curious about what the fuck that is. I have a lot of questions. And then there's this herb garden, and it says virulent yellow blossoms that wept fire, weeding out ivy from between climbing vines of softly glowing vegetables. What treasures grew within arm's reach? The courtyard was imposingly large, its contents intimidatingly varied. But then it was gone, and Scorio hurried along an even broader hallway, whose side was painted with an endlessly repeating geometric pattern in green and gold. And I was like, well, could you steal some of those vegetables, though? I know it's a terrible idea, and he absolutely must not. But there is a part of me that's would they miss it? They probably would. I bet this is the sort of place where they keep, tabs on, there's inventory done, every day. So there is a woman who is carrying, it says, a small case with the utmost reverence. And I was sort of wondering if maybe that held some more of that sapphire mana. Just wondering. So he has to show these guys his chit, another couple of, I don't remember if it's specifically guards or if no, it is guards. And, there is a run-in with this woman who, as soon as she turns up, the guards immediately stand at attention and get this sort of nervous look about them. With skin the color of wheat and dark chocolate brown hair worn in a thick braid that hung down over one shoulder nearly to her waist. I've been trying to picture the color of wheat. I'm assuming that's sort of a golden color, right? It's just, you don't hear wheat as a color for skin. It's usually what is used for hair. That's the wording. Okay, Dan is saying, I think a tanned white woman. Okay. I was thinking golden skin, either sort of a tawny, perhaps Asian or, but maybe just tanned white woman works. I don't know. It doesn't really matter probably. But, she is the one who stops short and sort of goes, wait, who are you? And when they tell her, oh, this guy is just delivering some juice, she's like, hold on a second. And she asks him to look at her. And she's like, you're not just a courier, are you? You have training and talent. How does a courier come to have such a powerful heart? Now, you guys know that I've been very curious to find out what exactly his heart's quality is in terms of the strength and depth of it for somebody doing only coal mana. She says such a powerful heart, but she could just mean in contrast to a courier who would have no power at all. Or it could be that he actually has a fairly powerful heart, considering that he has only used coal mana. I don't know. So I was hoping that this would like give me a little info, but when I stepped back and thought about it, I was like, it's too relative to know exactly what she meant by that. So he kind of takes a little bit of Naomi's story about, like, my father is a bureaucrat and he fed me things since I was a boy. He wanted me to join the academy. And he says, I ran away from home because I didn't want to join the academy. And I also didn't want to deliver the Dawn apple juice, but my employer gave me no choice. And she doesn't give a real good indication on whether she believes the story or not. She just asks, what is his name? He says Mimic. I love it. And then tells him, I'm going to need you to come to my office because a commoner having this kind of ability is just not seen often. And she starts to be like, who was your father? Before he even answers, like he's thinking, what the fuck should I say here? She cuts him off and she says, you know what, never mind, tell me everything later. And we find out later on, once he's talking to Lianshi and Leonis, that basically this lady has like such a bad memory for faces and names that it's a joke amongst everybody, that it's just, and guys, I am so much that way. And it's so embarrassing because people think because of this that I don't care about them. And it's just so untrue. I will remember really idiotic details about the conversation we had. I will remember things you told me about like your kids and your pets and all that. I just won't remember your name. Or if I see your face out of context, it will mean nothing to me. And this is something that I've really come to like notice about myself since going to the dog park with Pippin, because I remember the pets' names like flawlessly. It's just, I will have met their dog once and I'll be like, oh my God, it's Ranger. It's Raleigh, you know, like whatever. Their owners' names, not only do I not remember those, but I've run into the owners outside of the park without their dog, registered nothing. They had to be like from the park and I'll be like, oh, you're Bunny's owner. You guys, it's real bad. It's not good. Anyway, I just felt for her on this and the fact that it's like kind of a running joke. It's lucky for Scorio that this is who he winds up running into, but I just was like, oh, girl, I feel that pain. So she tells the guards, like, when you see him, I need you to make sure he gets back to me at my office. And I'm just like, the fact that he doesn't actually get got by them and brought to her office, I have to assume that she's going to like notice and be on the lookout for somebody like him again, or tell guards to be on the lookout. Like the fact that this dude turns up, he's got this delivery, she wants to speak to him, and he just like never appears and vanishes. Either she's going to think, okay, so he didn't want to join the academy, and this is part of his whole thing about like avoiding being part of this, and he didn't want to come to the office because he knew I was going to try and get him to join despite himself. Or she's going to get suspicious and be like, maybe that was a complete bullshit story and this guy has power and was trying to, you know, just like slip by. And that is, they're both potentially going to be cause for her to put feelers out and start like an APB kind of deal. You know what I'm saying? So he eventually reaches Lianshi and Leonis, and he says his roiling thoughts were smoothed away by the luxury of the room. The suite was spacious, high-ceilinged, with a natural slate floor whose subtle contours were smoothed by what might have been centuries of feet passing over it. A large fireplace was set just a few yards to the entrance's right, with a sunken living room area beyond it in the far corner. A single shelf ran along the wall, its surface laden with intriguing objects and heavy books. Doors led off to the left and right, but Scorio's attention was pulled past the dining table to the far wall, or lack of it. Thick bushes and massive fronds framed a stone walkway that meandered to a set of 3 freestanding steps that rose to the right to a platform that was just barely in sight, a stone platform built at the edge of a luminous pool of azure whose extent was hidden by the steam that rose from its surface. I wanted him to take a dip in this so bad. I just like hashtag team let Scorio take a bath. I'm just saying. After we had the disappointment of him not getting into the bathhouse last time, I was thinking that maybe he would get to like do a little dunk. Nah, he isn't getting to do a little dunk. You guys don't even know. With the little steam coming off it, I just desperately, I have two things that I am always like preoccupied with in terms of if I'm finding a Airbnb to stay in, or if I am like designing a space in a fictional, for example, Animal Crossing, if I were to play The Sims, even though I don't play The Sims, or in like little handheld games and stuff, if I can create a space, I need a fireplace of some kind, absolutely required, and B, a really deep pool or bathtub or something, preferably heated. I am somebody who would prefer to have like a really nice hot tub to a swimming pool, but I'll take a swimming pool if that's all we got. That's fine. So anyway, yeah, this whole thing, I was like, what it made me think of, you guys, when I went to a boarding school in California, I had a friend who we weren't supposed to have guests in our rooms for obvious reasons. And so my friend who came to visit me told everybody that she was staying in town with a friend of mine, with her parents. But there was a room where one of the students had gotten kicked out. And we took the mattress from that room, put it underneath my bed, and my friend would just hide in one of the bathrooms when they went door to door to check. And then she would slip out and she would sleep on the mattress on the floor right next to me at night. And she stayed for like a week. And that was what I kept thinking here, was just like, can you guys just get a mattress like under the bed and hide Scorio? And he can just fucking hang around in this pool and wander around to the vegetable gardens, eating magical vegetables and absorbing their powers, and just go slip back into your room at night and sleep. And can we just do that? But of course we cannot do that. So they bring him through this passageway, which later on he's talking to Naomi, and she describes like the different levels of secret passage, that they're the ones that like everybody knows about, and they're used so often that they barely count as a secret. There are ones that like few people know about and they're kind of like frowned upon. Then there are ones that everybody is like, you absolutely cannot use these for whatever reason. And then there are the ones that are real secrets that straight up nobody really knows about except for like one or two people. And I desperately want her to like sit down and do some blueprints for us. But, maybe eventually. I'm really hoping that he can get Naomi like into this school as well at some point, because my assumption, for no reason, is that Scorio is coming back here. I don't know why he would. I assume when it's time to pursue this lead about JOVA Spike. But anyway, so yeah, he gets to the locker. He opens it. There is nothing in it. And instead, there is a name carved in block letters, each an inch deep. JOVA Spike. And he is, first of all, understandably deeply upset at the fact that there's nothing in this locker. But secondly, he's like, what the fuck does this even mean? Would she like steal my stuff and leave her name to let me know and like fuck with me? And we find out some things here about JOVA Spike, but I'll get to those in a moment, because the first thing that we deal with, because Lianshi is nothing if not the queen of rational thought in the midst of this crisis. She stops every bit of emotional reaction from Scorio because he's just prepared to be pissed. And she's like, hold on, let's think this through. You're a great soul. You're a red lister, and you know it. You know there's going to be a whole fucking problem, a song and dance. if you show up again, and that more than likely all your shit's going to get taken, because that's likely the way it works here with your, and this was exactly my thinking at the end of the last section, was like, there won't be anything in his locker because he's a red lister, and of course people are going to take his shit. Like, it just made no sense to me that they would leave anything. And that's what she's saying here, is like, you would have thought of that, and you would create an alternate storage place for your stuff and leave yourself some kind of clue. And he stops and sort of considers this and realizes, like, yeah, I guess I wouldn't just go hide it, like, in Bastion somewhere, because how can I leave myself a clue to pursue there? So JOVA Spike clearly is me trying to tell myself something. But it's not clear, like, what I assumed at first. And I obviously, you guys know, there's no basis for this. This is just kind of my immediate, like, leap to conclusions based on not knowing anything of JOVA Spike's character, which we do come to find out more about it later, and it does not jive with this theory. But I'll tell you what I was thinking was that JOVA Spike was somehow in league with Scorio, and she managed to keep her, like, name clean, and he didn't. But she was low-key helping him with whatever he got in trouble for, and that he was naming somebody that was holding his stuff for him, was sort of an ally. However, based on the information we get about her, she sounds like a real by-the-book type. So I'm going to read these sort of little incidents that they tell him about. Scorio first is like, maybe we should break into her locker. And they're just like, we literally have no idea how to do that. No. And then he says, well, what if I just approached her in the graveyard? And Leonshi says she doesn't go to the graveyard. She spends that time training. So this is basically the equivalent of a woman who doesn't do recess at school. She just stays inside reading in study hall instead, which is just so, like, uptight. She's an overachiever, clearly. So I am really leaning into my Serena Williams at this point. I hope you guys know that. I said that as a joke last time, and it was like, I was serious about that being who I pictured. But at this point, she doesn't take breaks since he spends that time training. Yes, Serena Williams. I'm sorry. It's just all lining up. It's just all coming together. And he says, how could I convince her to speak with me or help me out? And Leonshi says, she's only friends with Juniper and Zala that I know of, her roommates. Lots of other people have tried to get close to her, though. She has hangers on. The houses court her at all hours of the day and night, and she created a lot of controversy when she refused House Hydra's offer of patronage. And Scorio's like, why would she refuse? They must have given her, like, they would have been willing to give her anything. And Leona says she just refused, and she hasn't talked to anybody or told them why, because she just doesn't talk about herself. And she says she eats more than Leonshi and I combined. The amount of meat and vegetables she puts away is frankly Leona's, says Leonshi. But yes, she seems to live for training and fighting. Some people are speculating her will is so strong that she'll make Tombspark before most of us even get to Emberling. But there's one other thing. She takes the Academy's rules very seriously. I mean, we all do, but she's on another level. Made waves when she returned an apotheosis pill to the pharmacy, said Leonis. The winner of the first gauntlet run gets one every week. Apparently, she was accidentally given two. Some think it was a ploy by one of the houses to show her how much better her situation could be if she accepted patronage. Anyway, Grevelar was there when she returned it, saw Emelos blanch and stutter as she just stared him down. So, it's made very clear, even when it is to her advantage, if something gets fucked up, she is not going to take advantage of it. This is not a person who gets the wrong change from the cashier and just is like, well, sucks to be them, and just takes it and goes home, like, for example, me. This is a person who, she looks underneath her cart and realizes there's a case of soda she didn't pay for, and she turns around and goes back inside and pays for that soda, whereas I'm like, thank you for the soda. This is what separates us, you know, and I make no bones about it, kiddos. I am driving away with that soda, and I will not even think a second thought about it. It's just absolutely their loss. Sorry for it. Thank you. And I'm going to put that $10 from that soda budget towards something a little bit more fun. And yet, despite all of this, I still have my suspicions about whether the fact she could have been an ally to Scorio. Because everything that I have been thinking about Scorio's deal has been predicated on the fact that whatever the Academy is allegedly training people for is kind of a lie. And that Scorio has been assigned his titles, red list status, because he bucked whatever societal establishment there was. And as much as I have very little evidence for that, I'm going to stick with it because I like it. And if she is a rule follower and she has found out that the Academy is fucking lying, she may align with Scorio because she's a rule follower. Does that make sense? Like, if you are lawful good and somebody appears to be like chaotic evil, but then you find out that actually your lawful good allies are lawful evil and the chaotic evil is actually like maybe chaotic good, you'd be more likely to align with chaotic good because you have just got some goals that line up with each other. So I don't actually really believe it. Not really, but like a little. There's a part of me that's just sort of, I would like it to be true just because I want Scorio. I don't want him to have just been somebody who got like corrupted over time into being power hungry for the sake of it and earned all of these titles because he was a fucking torturer who didn't care about other people. I believe that Scorio is the kind of person who just keeps asking questions and pushes, as we have seen for himself, yes. But if he were in a situation where he were given advantages, I could absolutely see him going too far and finding things out that other people wouldn't put the effort into discovering. And if JOVA Spike is also an overachiever, she may very well have been that way as well. And Scorio is somebody who lacks self-control a little bit. He has a temper, we've seen. He is somebody who can be a little bit impulsive. And if they're both aware of some lie, who do you think is going to keep their cool and not get caught that they know the truth? JOVA Spike sounds like the one who's going to have all her emotions on lock and keep it completely to herself. And put it in her journals, but probably put it in her journals in some sort of coded language so that she eventually discovers, but nobody else reading it would know what she had said was, what she was talking about. And I wouldn't be surprised if they worked together, if he were like, hey, leave some messages in your notes for me or something, like write it as if it's to yourself, but make it clear it would be for me. And that way it doesn't even look like it's his property. It's just information meant for him. I am wildly speculating. I admit I have nothing to base this on. It's just a feeling because Scorio is somebody who has proven himself repeatedly to care about what's fair. He is somebody who just always is on the side of the oppressed person. And I have a hard time seeing that becoming what he has been painted to be in his other lives, unless all of his resentments surrounding the fact that nothing is fair got the better of him, which honestly, I could understand that. If he became the sort of Gale type from Hunger Games, where Gale is like just really violent and looking for some kind of vengeance more than he is looking for an established peace because of the things that were done to him. And like, you can't blame him or fault him for being as angry as he is, but it's also not super helpful or useful in the long run. It could be possible that's how Scorio ends up where he is. It's just like his personality type. He's not somebody who enjoys seeing people get hurt unless it's like, even when it's somebody who sort of earned it, it's he has a self-awareness about the fact that he's like enjoying it, and he sort of asks himself about it in the moment. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. Scorio just doesn't feel like the type of person who becomes a straight up villain. There's clearly something happened, and I'm just really wanting there to be like a team up with JOVA Spike because I find her interesting. She's like our Hermione. So anyway, they have to figure out what they're going to do next, and like they're trying to sneak him out, and Scorio is like about to just leave, and Leonti's like, look, I don't know about continuing to just meet up the way that we have been at that restaurant, because people are going to start to notice. And what if we started to go to the ruins? Like, if we hurried, we could get there. And she says, what do you think, Scorio? A quarter of a cycle, which I think would be like a couple hours. And so they're like going to come and help him. And they're actually kind of excited because this kind of thing is exactly what's going to help with their own like practice and progression in everything. And so yeah, this is Leonti's idea, and Leonis is like, yeah, you know what, that's dope, let's definitely do that. So next 8th day we're gonna come and visit you. And they do, and it goes weird, but we'll get there. So he goes home, and Naomi is there, and he's very relieved because the way she sort of took off last time, he was like, is she gonna even come back? Like, what was that? And she gets a little vulnerable with him here, and is like, look, I was doing all right. And he, of course, privately is like, were you? But he lets it slide. I was doing all right. I was kind of numbed out, doing my same thing every day with no real objective, and it was fine. And he's like, yeah, sounds fine. Sounds great. And then you showed up, and you fucked all of it up for me. And now I'm feeling feelings and caring about stuff. And you know what? I know you're going to like die probably pretty soon, or something's going to happen to you, but it is entertaining while you're here. So I'm just going to go ahead and try and like enjoy this entertainment and let myself be amused. And he's like, okay, I mean, that's fine. I guess I'll take it, you know? And she says, I'll continue your training. It's reminding me of things I'd forgotten. Opened avenues of exploration for my own development. And again, it's just all said so grudgingly. Like, it's been clear this is what's going on with her. And she acts like saying it is making it real. It was already real. We just needed you to just admit it. Okay? Like, it's not that deep. It's fine. So you've so much to learn that I'm curious how much I can cram inside your brain before you die. I love your motivation, said Scorio, straightening. So he tells her about his locker, and it turns out she's actually heard the name JOVA Spike, but doesn't like know personally. She hasn't met her or any, person associated with her, I don't think. And then she starts talking about how to ignite his heart in a place that is very low and thin in mana, and says you have to saturate your heart and keep it that way so that if you need to ignite later, you can do it immediately. And Scorio is like, oh, okay. And then when he stops and considers what that means, he's like, fuck. And he tries to say like, well, I was able to draw on mana really quickly when I was fighting that monster. And she's like, yeah, but you weren't trying to hold it. You were pulling it and immediately igniting and accessing it. Holding it is akin to holding your breath. And when you're at your very beginning stages, you aren't going to be able to do it like almost at all. Eventually, you're going to be able to do it for days at a time. And it's really kind of fun to see this because he has a completely different reaction to this training as compared to the fighting training, which makes sense for his personality type. For him, training that is basically, I won't say it's completely outside of his control because then this wouldn't work as training, right? It is under his control to a degree, but it's under his control in such tiny increments that it feels like it's not accomplishing anything when he trains. And so he is getting really, really, really impatient about it, which, God, I can fucking understand. You know, guys, I am somebody who needs my immediate gratification, friends. I am not proud of that. It's like one of my worst qualities is how childish I can be about wanting results immediately, even though everything in my head and heart knows that's unreasonable and not going to happen and impossible to demand. If I don't get something tangible, I just want to fucking give up. I really, really do. And it's part of what's like, for me, I love our new age of all of this data being available to us regarding like fitness and exercise, because I can look at my app after my run today and see that my heart rate was lower than my last 2 runs and that my pace was identical. So I can see actual data saying you're getting into better shape. Your heart rate is lower, but you're maintaining the same pace and distance. So it's fine. If I didn't have that, if I were training like 20 years ago and I had to do all of this, like, you know, analog with a timer and doing the math myself, I wouldn't, first of all. And I would be very frustrated at the fact that I feel like I'm not getting anywhere. But now I've got the data to prove I am, even though it's a little bit, it's something. It's something to help me when I finish my run and I'm kind of like, why am I doing this to myself? I can be like, that's why. See, even though it's a little, it's something. I know that Scorio is able to like perceive that he's getting a little bit better at it, but he hasn't yet really been in a position where it's crucial that he be able to do this. And I think that's what's sort of missing for him. He utilized all of his power and collapsed in that one session with Naomi where she was making a point about burning his actual heart and how dangerous that would be. But I feel like if he were put in the position of needing to be able to hold and go into some place that has a very low saturation of mana, the motivation from that experience might push him to become more dedicated to this, because he is somebody that needs like that material example to point to for why it's so important so that he doesn't wind up in that position again. You know what I mean? So anyway, this is just me thinking out loud, but I just thought this was an interesting lesson. And I think it's funny that it's so much harder for him to like just sit still and focus on doing this, even though the other training he was so much more into, despite, you know, at the end of the day, covered in bruises and cuts and just like fucked up, he would prefer that. I mean, sir, stop and think about this for a second. So eventually, she's like, all right, we're going to go for a walk and you're going to try and sense the quality and density and quantity of the mana around you as we go. And they go to the gruel fountain, and he is, and I really had to say, guys, the fact that he was like at the academy and with his friends, but then he has to stop by the gruel fountain afterwards. I need his friends to prepare a bag of snackies for him when he comes to visit them. And drop it off so that he has a little something to take home with him. He shouldn't have to go to the gruel fountain after he has hung out with you and delivering an amphora full of a valuable juice. And you just send him back. And no, give him something for his way home. Give him some of that fucking juice. Something, you know? Get him one of those little like camel hydration packs that you wear on your back that he can just have a little sippy sip on his way in. Anyway, so finally, there is something here that I think is really interesting. There is a person watching him that she spots, and he is assuming that this is Dola, that finally his fucking around, he is starting to now find out. And I had honestly sort of assumed Dola had given up on him, that he had vanished well enough. It was just a sort of done deal, like, oh well. But we find out later how valuable that sapphire mana is, and that probably somebody higher up the chain is mad that they didn't get their shit and making Dola pay for that. So now Dola is going to be like more determined than ever to come at him. This person shows up by themselves, but they're close enough to like his home that maybe they know where he lives. I don't think probably yet, but I do enjoy the fact that Naomi is basically like, I'll handle them. You know, just the fact that she's out here just being like, don't worry about them, I got it, is it's a big step for her. And it's also hot. I just love it whenever anybody is just like, you absolutely do not need to be concerned about these fools. You won't even notice that I'm handling them. That's how easy it's going to be for me to do. You know what I'm saying? I love that so much. But anyway, so there's some talk here about the mana before they actually get to that moment, where she talks about like the difference in what kind of like situation you want with mana, whether or not it's better for it to move quickly, because it's light, or whether you want it denser, even though it's slower. And Scorio immediately says you want it denser. And she's like, well, it depends. Dense mana doesn't move, which means you've got to move instead. If there isn't sufficient mana to power your techniques, the more insubstantial the mana, the more it will flow into areas that have been drained, so that you might be able to remain stationary and let the mana come to you. So it's all the same. You have to move to suck up dense mana or stand still to let light mana come to you. It's not all the same. Some densities are such that you can fuel your power from one small area alone. Others are so light that no amount washing over you will allow you to ignite. You simply must be aware of the nature of the mana around you and adapt your battle plan accordingly. That's not to mention how great souls can weaponize their use of mana to the detriment of their foes. And she describes somebody who is able to basically put them in a bubble so that they can't access mana around them. If they saturate ahead of time and they've got their heart completely powered, then they'll still be able to do stuff, but they won't be able to keep drawing on their surroundings. And she says it's also why great souls leave Bastion once they grow more powerful. Even Iron will barely sustain a flame vault or dread blaze without their focusing on mana manipulation. Pyre Lords and up are supposed to feel as if they're asphyxiating. Except the closer they get to the pit, the better the mana. Naomi nodded. So don't believe everything they tell you about our most powerful members dedicating themselves solely to the war against the fiends. They're out there mostly to take advantage of the higher quality mana. Rare is the great soul that will settle for weaker mana, or weaker technique to remain in Bastion. Scorio mentions Praximar as a Pyre Lord, and she calls him a weak excuse for a Pyre Lord, who is content to lord his rank over everyone else at the expense of never gaining more power. It's a miracle he passed Dreadblaze. Well. I believe her. I absolutely take her assessment of this man at face value. We met him. We saw what a little shit he is. No question. Absolutely believe her. Then they talk about the passageways and everything and the ones that are dangerous to use. And this is when she mentions the person watching him. Had to happen eventually. You'd best be much more careful moving forward. Should we leave? We're only 4 spots from the fountain. No, if they give us trouble, I'll take care of it. I don't want to have stood here for an hour for nothing. So they get their gruel, and it says that afternoon she taught him what she called the first form. I keep wanting to say first storm. I don't know why. When he said it in the audiobook, I still heard it as first storm. I don't know why that's changing up in my brain, but I did it even in text. So that's fucking embedded for some reason. It was a slow and elaborate dance against invisible opponents, each step laid out, each blow predetermined. It reminded Scorio of his rhythm work against her, where they traded parries and blows, but this was one he could work alone. And this just reminded me of like Tai Chi, which is just a sort of like energy work. And when she shows him, it's clear that he's kind of like, I'm not feeling this. What do you... And she decides to give him a show. So she does it, but with the proper focus that she's meant to do, you know? And he sees the difference in it immediately. The whole way that her body language changes, how she tenses but also smooths out, that there is something that's like explosive but also incredibly controlled about the whole thing. And it's almost like he can actually see the people that she's fighting, these invisible, adversaries. So when she finally comes back to herself, it says she inhaled audibly, and Scorio felt the mana around them shiver, only for it to settle as she exhaled once more. "What was that?" he asked, impressed. Naomi relaxed, and the intensity blew away like smoke in the wind. The first form marries precision with intent, control with aggression. Ambitious, hungry, great souls like yourself find it hard to dedicate time to, but in time it'll become natural for you to move through its steps, and when it does, you'll learn how to inhale and exhale mana from your heart as you go. And that, it made me think a little bit of like when you're doing yoga, I was about to say if you're doing yoga properly, and I don't really like that term because any movement's good movement, right? But part of what is important to the theory of yoga is the breath work that goes along with it. And understandably, when you're first learning yoga, that is not a priority for you. You're like, okay, but holding downward dog, which is supposed to be a restful position, is killing me. Let me just do this. I'm breathing hard. I'm sorry, but I can't deal with when I'm supposed to inhale right now. And that's totally understandable. But once you begin to get more used to poses and get in better shape, you are able to inhale with certain movements and exhale with other movements. And once you are able to start doing that, it feels like a completely different exercise than it did before. It's like it's all natural, and coming to a new pose feels like what your body naturally wants to do. And I'm trying to explain it, but suffice to say, I am like trying to get back to that place with it now, because I haven't done yoga consistently in a while, and I've been starting again, and I can remember what it was like, and I'm not there at the moment. Like, everything is difficult, and I'm just breathing hard through all of it, and I'm just keeping with it because I know I'll get there eventually. But the feeling of it when you are able to get there is just, it's a completely different experience. So then she agrees to come and see him tomorrow. "Now that I've really started your training, I'd hate to lose you to some stupid accident, so be careful." And he goes and gets his stuff, goes down into, and let's see, it was an exercise in frustration, at times managing to reach saturation while keeping his wits about him. And he's, doing this exercise as he's going to check on the flowers that he planted, and he's telling himself to not get his hopes up. But when he goes and looks, he is so excited. This island is like covered in flowers. There's like a bunch of them. And he is genuinely startled at how effective this has proven to be so quickly. And, I'm a little surprised that it works this easily. I have to say, I think that there's got to be more of a challenge coming. As somebody who is just barely starting to get into gardening, I've been reading a lot about like the different pests and blights and funguses that you've got, that you have to deal with. And it's really intimidating. And so I'm just sort of like, okay, so it bloomed immediately. Amazing. I can sprout seeds. That's great. But how do I keep them alive? Once I plant them, like, there's all kinds of things that can go wrong. So after endless cycles spent hunting down an errant plant, after all the risks he'd taken to reach them at their most hidden and recondite, which is a word that I meant to look up and I didn't. Now I'm going to look it up. What? Okay, I don't think that's what they meant. I just did Wikipedia and I got recondite is a German musician, techno producer, label owner, and sound artist. I do not think that was what they intended by this word. I'm just saying. I'm trying to go into the dictionary section because now I'm like, hold on a second. Here it is. Adjective. Little known. Semicolon. Abstruse. Abstruse? Guys, did you know the word abstruse? Am I alone in this? Looking this up now. Abstruse. Definition of abstruse: difficult to penetrate, incomprehensible to one of ordinary understanding or knowledge. I love that word. Oh my God. The professor's lectures were so abstruse that students tended to avoid them. Synonyms: deep, recondite, there it is, or esoteric. Abstruse. That is being added to my verbal arsenal, my friends. Absolutely. All right. So anyway, he sets up a thing so that he can like take the little bead that gets harvested, but it gets hidden in such a way that hopefully things that wander around looking for something to feed on won't be able to see it too easily. And then we have chapter 30, where it's the visit from his friends. And it's really funny because he's so focused on like doing these exercises to saturate his heart that his friends are like directly in front of him and he doesn't notice that they're there because he's so in his head. And it's a really interesting section because the two of them have to travel with him through this area that's like, basically, he's bringing him through to the projects and they are not used to being anywhere but uptown. And so as they get further and further in, they are beginning to really stand out because their clothing and attitudes are just not what you see around here. And we're getting into areas where straight up whole blocks are like boarded up. Nobody lives there. He's just got squatters. And he's just walking through like, oh yeah, see that? That's blank, blank, blank. And he knows his way around here, and it's actually kind of familiar in like a pleasant way, despite how grim it feels. And they're fascinated, but also you can see like somewhat tense. And it was just kind of fun because if you are somebody who's like from a really different kind of background than another person that you've hung out with, it can feel this way when you're bringing them to your territory and you know that they're not used to this. And I've been on the end that they're in, where my father, being an immigrant from Colombia, he married my mom, who was a white woman, and they moved to like the suburbs of Connecticut. And my father set aside teaching me Spanish in favor of like getting me to be as white presenting as possible because he knew that would be advantageous for me, which he was, unfortunately, that is true. But I wound up in a very like upper middle class neighborhood in a school system that had mostly white kids with mostly white teachers. And I had a really like particular kind of experience growing up. And my cousins on my father's side, who both parents were immigrants, and so they each were like not English speakers initially. They learned very quickly, but they had fewer opportunities because they both had to learn the language first, and they were thus living in lower income areas. When I would go and visit those cousins, the whole experience was so different, and I would realize what a completely different life I was living in comparison to them, because they were in these apartment complexes where it was just like there was violence popping off in the parking lots. It was just a sort of aesthetic thing as well, where like there's just broken glass and trash everywhere. You've got people like wandering around with shopping carts full of stuff, and either because they're homeless and that's their stuff, or because that's a way that people just make some extra cash around here. It used to be a lot more popular than it is today, but gathering cans to bring them to the can return. And talking to them about like growing up, like the school system for them, they would talk about how they would get given worksheets and just leave them on their desks when they all got up and left class. And if they all decided they weren't doing their worksheets, the teacher couldn't do shit about it because it's basically like workers going on strike. That would never have happened at my school. There, no question, if a class tried to pull that, parents would be called and there would be like a meeting about it, and we would all have been read the riot act. But this school that they were at, it was, parents who were both working fucking at least full time, if not each working 2 jobs. They don't have time for this shit. If their kids don't want to learn, that fucking sucks. But they have to be able to keep food on the table, and they don't have time for tutoring for the SATs and shit, And I just really remember like looking around and being like, Jesus, if things had gone a little different, this would have been my situation. And I really learned at a pretty young age to be like, to feel lucky for the fact that I was put in the position to have things that they didn't. Even as I was envious of my like other friends at school who had more money and more advantages than I did, I was still like, well, at least I'm not in a class where just doing a worksheet is considered like almost, you would probably be mocked for doing it, you know, or bullied because you're ruining it for the whole class who just doesn't want to do it. But anyway, I was just thinking about like feeling like a fish out of water and not really having the understanding until you're in a place that, yeah, you don't fit here. Like, this is not your place. You have this constant sense of belonging most of the time, or even being above it. And then you come somewhere where it's like, that's just a disadvantage, actually. This is going to be a problem for you. If you're not able to blend a little bit better, you're a target. And I do like the fact that as they continue, Scorio is just like getting more and more enjoyment out of showing them the different creatures. And like at one point, Leonci sees this nautilus that's like floating, and Leonis is just like, what the? It's flying. Like the whole thing, this is just a completely different world here, you know? And then there's also the mention of the Heartstone, which Scorio is like realizing, oh, maybe that's the thing that I pulled out of that animal. So hopefully we'll return to that and see if there's something he can do with that. But the first mission that they're going on here, the three of them, is to deal with this fucking toad. This fucking toad. It's so strange, you guys. Now, I'm almost out of time, and I probably will have to continue talking about this a little bit more in the next episode. But the toad basically sucks in tons of mana and is saturated. And Leonis is able to, like, give some information about what this thing, like, how it functions. And I'm trying to find the spot where he explains this. Yeah, here it is. When a fiend's oozing mana, it means they're an engorger. They'll find a truly deep well of their mana type and just float in it like a fish in water till their very substance becomes infused. Engorgers can cannibalize their own hearts. They can fuel their powers with their own hyper-infused substance. They basically don't run out of power. So they each have a plan. And of course they go with Scorio's in the end, which is I'm going to try and like get it to drain out. And that way, when you guys come in and attack it, he'll have been, you know, I'll draw him out some. And the way that this winds up working out is so hard for me to like tell exactly where it's going to lead. So he goes after this toad, and there's this moment that really got me worried, guys. Leonis was unable to duck when the toad finally gulped down all the drained mana, opened its mouth, and hit him with its elongated tongue, slamming the oily, mucus-covered tip into his side, engulfing his arm and hip. Leonis went stiff, eyes bulging, and the tongue retracted, hauling him through the air as if he were little more than an insect. And I was just like, excuse me? So he pulls some mana into his heart. He crashes down on the tongue and stabs his rod into it, pinning it to the ground. The toad let out a panic, "Release my friend or I'll cut straight through." "Release my friend, I'm going to count to 3. "Can't," said the toad awkwardly. "So you can speak?" I was not ready. I was not ready for this thing to be able to talk. "Make clear. Leal? Release the tongue and I go." "How can I trust you?" "Say, ahasa." I really fell for this toad. Oh my god. God, he's got his tongue. That's so embarrassing. This is so undignified. Ugh. So, it's got this look on its face. And so, like, at first Scorio's like, why should I do this? But he can see, like, the toad's freaking out a little bit, you know? And so he finally is like, all right, fine. And he takes the rod out. The toad's tongue shot back into its maw, its lips sealed tightly, and its soft throat worked several times as if it were swallowing or working its tongue about. Breathing heavily, Scorio watched it, chalk held at the ready. But then the huge toad turned slowly, tensed, and leapt away, its leap carrying it completely over the tumbled houses of fallen blocks to fall out of sight on the far side. I am so curious about what this toad... Like, this is the second time, if we're talking about Naomi as well, that Scorio has managed to, like, force somebody into being on his side against their will by trapping them. I don't know what he can do with this toad, but I feel like he's going to cash in on that eventually. And I do not know what that's going to look like, genuinely. Meanwhile, Leonis is like, I can't believe I fell first again. What the fuck? Like, he's really mad about it. You know why, dude? Because you just throw yourself in there because you're a good man. You know what? That's why. And I think that's something to be proud of, actually. So the chapter ends with them sort of regrouping. I love Leonis has like slime all over his robes, and he just says, what a tragedy about his clothing. You ready? Naomi told me to not expect much within. And Leonshi says, you never know. Perhaps everyone's been telling themselves the same thing for centuries, which I actually liked that idea. I don't think it's probably likely, but you know, let's see what we can find inside. Let's see what treasures may have been forgotten and await us within. And that is the end of chapter 30. So I hope you guys all enjoyed my imitation of a toad with his tongue stuck on something. And I feel like I really did that justice. The poor thing. I want to name it. What do we name this toad, guys? We've got to come up with a good, solid, toad-like name. The thing about saying a toad-like name is that any name I come up with, somebody out there listening may have that name and be like, the fuck you mean my name is toad-like? I apologize ahead of time. If you are listening and you have a name that I wind up picking, I can't tell you how much I feel for you that you have a toad-like name. But you do, probably, if I chose it. So, I'm going to go with Eugene. That's going to be my name for the toad for right now. We're going to say Eugene. I don't know why that's toad-like. It is, though. So, okay. Dan is saying it gets a name. Yes, it does. Eugene. All right, guys. I will see you on Thursday. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.